So, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, a practical approach to aerosol mitigation. Let me check, it's 1 minute before 3 o'clock in Germany. Welcome to all of those who are logged into this webinar. Before we start, I want to do some technical information. You've got two possibilities to interact. First of all, you've got the possibility to raise your hand. So give me 5. So that's your possibility to agree or to applause when you agree what I say. So your micro will be muted. So it's your indication to say, yes, I agree, or applause, or whatever you want to give me 5. So that's one possibility. And the second possibility is to use the chat. So this is not a recorded webinar. So this is a live webinar. So you've got the possibility to ask questions, and we will do minimum 15 minutes discussion at the end. So please use that possibility to ask questions. And to test this, I ask you to introduce yourself, maybe say hello from Stockholm, say hello from Bergen or from Copenhagen. So wherever you are, please use the chat to say hello. Here the weather is, I would say, typically Scandinavian weather, very windy, sun is shining, it's raining parallel, so everything mixed together. So please give me your feedback so that I know that you understand the tool and you understand how to say hello. So please use the chat function to say hello. Somebody raise his hand, but nobody give me feedback. So I wonder why it's not working. So please give me the feedback. There is on the right side a possibility to say hello. Okay, thank you very much. So hello from Finland. Hello to all the others. Hello from Denmark. So this is a special Scandinavian webinar. So welcome to the north from the south of Germany. It was not easy to find the chat, but you find it, you manage it. So it's on the right side. There is a slider you can slide, or if you are logged in with the app, do not know where exactly is the chat. I think there is a question mark where you have to press, and then you find the chat. Oh, thanks for this reply. You have to press the arrow. Okay, maybe this helps all the others. So there is a slider on the right side, and then you have to press the arrow, and then you can add your questions. So the plan of today is I will minimize my webcam. So you see, I did this webinar out of my clinic. So this is not a background. So this is really a live clinic there, and you see a lot of tools there. And I plan to do some practical issues. But I think it fits to today's topic, a practical approach to aerosol mitigation. Well, I have to be a little bit more precise. Today's topic is dental aerosols. So we talk about dentistry, and we talk about the threat being infected by aerogene transmitted pathogens. So we will not focus on SARS-CoV-2. We will make a little bit more general discussion. And we will start with a short introduction of me and myself. My name is Dr. Martin Koch, which is on the next slide. You hopefully see. Okay. I studied biology, and I did my doctorate in biotechnology and microbiology. So I'm a little bit familiar with this issue. But I'm since more than 20 years in this dental business. So I think I can combine both. The microbial background, the technical background, because I was a technical trainer at DURR Dental, and also the dental background. And what you see on the next slide is I spent a lot of time this year and also last year's in webinars. So I really got a nice overview about the situation in Australia. I did a webinar that was transmitted into a Congress hotel. You see that on the right upper corner there. I was logged in from in the morning, 3 o'clock Germany. So I did some webinars in the United States, in Asia. I also did some podcasts all over Europe. And today is my first webinar for Scandinavia. So it will be really of my interest to see some questions, because the situation in each country is completely different. Today, we talk about the threat of these new Indian mutations that rise up. And I'm quite sure there will be rise up new questions about the infectivity of dental aerosols by these new mutants. So these are the things we want to discuss. And I know and understand that also in Scandinavia, there is a big difference between Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, and Finland, by the way. So maybe there rise up some interesting questions at the end of this presentation. Well, if you want to read something, I already published a so-called white paper on the website from DURR Dental, where there is a summary about the latest studies on dental aerosols and the possibility to reduce the threat by intraoral evacuation, and that's something I want to focus today. We did some studies right out of this clinic here, and we try to publish it. I would say we are just in front of our of success, because it's already accepted at +1. We are in the peer review state, so it's not available right now, but I think in the next weeks you can download that, our study on +1, and that's a quite success, because I'm employed at DURR Dental at a company, and I think it's a big success story that we are able to launch and publish a study at a very important journal like +1. So let me introduce on 3 slides DURR Dental, because maybe you're not familiar with DURR Dental. DURR Dental is a family-owned company, 80 years young, and DURR Dental launched in the 50s the first dental vacuum system. We call it PUTS 560, and you see it here on that graph. So since more than 60 years, we are now in focus on reducing spray mist, and DURR Dental was also the company who launched the first spray mist suction system. So, and that's important information. Spray mist and aerosol is 2 sides of a coin. If you generate spray mist, then you produce also dental aerosols. So DURR Dental launched the first spray mist suction in the 60s, and DURR Dental also launched the first cleaning and disinfecting product for suction systems. And Ortol is the brand. I'm quite sure you know this brand, and it's also effective against SARS-CoV-2. So, and this is my last slide to introduce DURR Dental. DURR Dental is very successful in all these systems you've got in your machine room: compressor, suction, amalgam separation, but also hygiene devices. And we are market leader of digital X-ray scanner, X-ray unit, intraoral cameras, sensors, etc. We are very strong in hygiene and in preventive therapy like prophylaxis. So we've got a nice range of products, some of them, and I want to focus today on suction and on the possibility to reduce the threat of SARS-CoV-2 and the other aerogene transmitted pathogens. So what's my plan of today, ladies and gentlemen? 4 questions. First of all, I want to give you an overview over studies. So we will go into a lot of studies published, well, beginning from the 70s up to January this year. So it will be a bunch of studies that gives you an overview over the discussion of dental aerosols. This is part 1. Part 2 is the discussion about the infectivity. So are there any studies that prove that you can be infected by dental aerosols? We will talk about infectivity. Number 3 is the discussion about what are the possibilities to reduce the threat. So we talk about mitigation strategies. And once again, there are a lot of very successful strategies you use since decades. And maybe this is the reason why. There was a new study from the US that the epidemic numbers of dentists and dental assistants are lower than in the other medical fields, a little bit higher than in the population, but lower than in other medical fields. So I think because of the threat is still there, but there are a lot of mitigation strategies which are very, very successful, and those things we want to discuss. And finally, we will have part number 4, some practical tips and tricks keeping the office safe based on the physical background about well, intraoral suction, about, well, keeping the flow, etc., etc. So 4 parts. First of all, I want to start with the question aerosol versus dental aerosol. I think this is a very important discussion because I think it's quite clear, and that's nothing new, that you work in the dental environment. Well, it's a risky business. I think that's not a new story because you are constantly exposed to patients that maybe are infected. You do not know each infection. You are working in front of the patient's mouth 20, 30, 40 centimeters for minutes. So that's quite clear that it is a risky job. And that's not a new story. In the 80s, we discussed about the threat being infected by hepatitis B. Well, there is a vaccination today, so there is no discussion about that, but there is still a discussion about being infected by hepatitis C. And in Germany, each year, more than 5,000 people are infected by hepatitis C, by the way, and there is no vaccination available. Well, in the 90s, you all know the discussions about HIV and the risk being infected. Well, there is a threat being infected by Coccus, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and also TB is an issue, tuberculosis. Well, and well, even it's not a serious disease, herpes simplex is also, or varicella zoster virus is also a problem. So it's not a new story, but the discussion rise during this pandemic and the discussion about working in dentistry is a dangerous job. It's also a political discussion. And when you look on my next slide, where this is published by the New York Times, where they publish the top 10 of the most dangerous jobs. And believe me or not, number 3 is a dentist, number 2 is a dental assistant, and number 1 is being a dental hygienist. What you see on the x-axis is the proximity to your patients, okay, 20, 30 centimeter. This is very near. And on the y-axis, it's the exposure to disease. So what is the viral load? Yeah, because we are working in an aerosol environment, and that brings me back to the discussion. What is a dental aerosol and what's a human aerosol? And is this a difference, yes or no? Okay, some statements from the Robert Koch Institute. Well, my name is Martin Koch, but Robert Koch was not my grandfather, by the way. Well, he's one of the founders of microbiology. He founded the cause of tuberculosis, and to honor him, the official health institute in Germany, so the FDA, the German FDA, is called Robert Koch Institute. So he was not my grandfather, by the way. Koch is a very popular name in Germany. So let's look on the statements. I think it's quite clear that the main route of transmission is the inhalation. It's the inhalation of particles. So it's not the inhalation of aerosols, of particles. Because I do not know why the discussion rise up also by these aerosols. And you will see that it's not only an issue of aerosols, it's also an issue of fine droplets that are a little bit larger than aerosols, which will produce a main route of transmission in dentistry. So it's, once again, it's the inhalation of virus-containing particles. So that's the statement. And now we have to discuss, is it a threat? Is it a threat? And is there a difference between a human aerosol and a dental aerosol? And yes, of course, it is. And when you compare statements, when you compare results, you always have to keep in mind most of the results are made of human aerosols in a lab. That means under controlled conditions, under controlled temperature, under controlled light, under controlled humidity, etc., etc., etc. For instance, when you discuss about the half-life time of these viruses in these aerosols, and that's a discussion that will rise up. How often do I have to disinfect my surfaces? How long do I have to wait until the next patient can enter my room? So all these studies are made by human aerosols. So we cannot compare, because a dental aerosol is always a mixture of 90% dental water plus something else. So whenever we produce an aerosol, we produce an aerosol out of a spray mist. So first is the spray mist, and the spray mist will generate an aerosol. So each procedure that generates a spray mist is also a procedure that can generate an aerosol. And therefore, these procedures are called AGPs. So when you enter AGPs in Google, you will find tons of studies you can compare. So whenever you talk about dental aerosols, you talk about AGPs, aerosol generating procedures. Well, here you've got a list, ladies and gentlemen, about, it's not a complete list. This is the top 5 of aerosol generating procedures in dentistry. First of all, whenever you use a water-cooled handpiece, a turbine, a red, a green angled handpiece, you generate aerosols or spray mist. Because it's water-cooled, you have to cool. A turbine, you have to cool by 50 milliliter per minute of water. So, and then you deflect this spray on the tooth surface or on the turning drill, and that generates this spray mist and finally these aerosols. Well, whenever you use ultrasonic scalers or air scalers like Cavitron, once again, you produce an aerosol, but there is a different risk, and that's something we want to discuss, which is the top AGP or the most problematic AGP. And those procedures maybe you can avoid. So we want to make a list, what I think is the top aerosol producer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, but on this summary, it's just a summary. So finally, when also you use a 3-in-1 piston, air and water syringe, once again, you produce aerosol if you press the water and the air button together. then you produce aerosols. And finally, on that list, there's the powder jet handpiece you use for prophylaxis, where you also generate these dental aerosols. So this is an overview. So as I told you, when you look into these dental aerosols, you will find 90% dental water. And this is the difference to a human aerosol, where this is saliva. This is 90% dental water. And there was a nice comparison in a study. It's like a bath tube of water and 1 spoon of saliva. So that's the mixture, the relationship. Yeah, so it's 90% dental water plus a spoon of saliva. Yeah, so some percent. Well, finally, those blood and saliva particles, they contain this microorganism, but it's a dilution, and that's the difference to a human aerosol. Well, a big issue are also the solid particles. Maybe some of you have got some allergic reactions against composites, because also these composite particles are part of this dental aerosols, and if you inhalate them, maybe you've got some problems. So do not ignore also this part, and it's also a threat. If you inhalate this amalgam dust or this dentine dust, or also the small particles from filling materials like composites. So this is a video from a colleague in Turkey where we try to demonstrate the contamination of this spray mist. And I stop it right there. And here we add a red dye to the dental water. And then you can easily detect, well, you contaminate by a splatter and by droplets 20, 30, 40 centimeters, and they hit the face shield. And if you would not wear a face shield, it would contaminate your skin. So this is by running a turbine. You could not detect the aerosols because those particles are smaller. And that's something I want to discuss now together with you on this slide. So when you generate spray mist, you produce a mixture of different sizes. There are big splatter particles, so big droplets, we call it splatter, larger than 50 microns. Well, they showed a ballistic flow, a ballistic behavior. So like a stone that falls back to the ground, and they contaminate only, well, some centimeters around a patient's head. So these are the splatter. They are normally not an issue because, well, you can disinfect and they contaminate the patient. Maybe your dental unit, but there you've got the surface disinfection to handle that. Well, and then finally, you've got the next segment, the next components, and these are small droplets. Droplets between 5 and 50 microns. And they play an important role because they contain a big load of virus particles, bacteria, etc. They are not aerosols, they are larger than aerosols, but they can produce aerosols due to evaporation. So if a 20 micron particle emits the mouth and there is a low humidity and a higher temperature, it starts to shrink because of evaporation. And then you produce concentrated aerosols out of this bigger particle. So therefore, also this particle are in the focus of a lot of studies. So droplets between 5 and 50 microns. And finally, there are aerosols, by definition smaller than 5 microns. They can stay in the air. Well, and maybe you read some figures about how long they stay in the air, etc. And I will show you some studies about dental aerosols and the times they need to settle down. So this is the definition of an aerosol, of droplets and of splatters. Well, particles that are smaller than 10 microns reach the alveoli of the lung and can be inhalated. So that's another statement. So it's not only an issue of these aerosols, because you are in a very near distance to your patient, it's also a problems of this small droplets. And that's what you can show, what we can show, or you can see on this video made by the King's College in London. And it's made, it's not a model, mathematic model. This is a real-time live measurement of particles that emits from a mouth of a mannequin. So from a turbine, and what you see are particles. They fly up to 40 centimeters into your face, and then they showed a ballistic behavior, and this ballistic behavior depends on physical parameters. And one of these parameters, for instance, is the mass, so the size of these particles, the speed of these parameters, and you can easily calculate that. And that brings me to the discussion of the top three. So ladies and gentlemen, what do you think are the worst aerosol generating procedures? Well, I made some videos and I will start that videos from left to right. First of all, I start the video. This is a powder jet handpiece. Well, you see in the center, the powders, and these powders are covered by a water layer. Well, and what you see on this slow motion are all tons and millions of particles. But also when I start my turbine, which is the movie in the middle, well, this produce also a lot of particles. And I will start also the ultrasonic scalers on the right side, and it will also produce a lot of particles. So I think it is very hard to decide which is number one, number two, and number three. So therefore you have to measure the particles, and that's something I want to show you later on when we go to our study that was performed in this clinic, because you can measure this particle. And the first measurement is maybe there. Here we measure the size of these particles that is produced by a turbine. And what you see is a huge range. You produce each size, starting from aerosols to small droplets and also to splatter. So it's a complete range, so everything. Well, and now you have to quantify them and well, estimate the risk. And that's something you'll see on this graph. So on the left side, you see the number of particles if you compare different AGPs. And on the right side, you see the speed of the particles. And I think the discussion is very clear. The more particles you produce with a high speed, the more you've got a problem, because you inhalate them and they reach your face and then you can inhalate them. And let's compare something. An air and water syringe, a 3-in-1 piston, and a powder jet handpiece produce a lot of particles with a very high speed. So therefore, this is my number one and number two. An air water syringe and a powder jet handpiece is the worst scenario. And that's the reason why the German Association recommends to use or to avoid powder jet handpiece. And you can use polishing pastes instead of powder jet handpieces. And they also recommend to use a 3-in-1 piston, either rinsing with water or drying with air and not parallel. So that's an easy tip where you can avoid producing these particles. Well, the question is, an ultrasound scaler or an air scaler a problem, yes or no? It's not easy to answer, because here we compare 3 different scalers. And what you see is well, there's a big difference between maybe scalar, the perioscalar, the air scalar, and the piezo scalar 1. And when you count the numbers, and there's also a difference, well, in the speed of these particles. And I want to point that out by the next video, maybe where it's much more clearer. Here we compare a scalar on the left side and another ultrasound device on the right side. And I think it's visual. It's very clear that there is a difference between left and right. And finally, it depends on the energy and of the design of the tips. So a scalar could be a worse scenario or better scenario. It depends on the movement. Maybe if you use new instruments, it will be better than if you use used instruments. So the movement of the instruments is the important issue. So let's summarize. You can't compare a dental aerosol to a human aerosol. So, and whatever you read in newspapers, in studies, you always have to ask the question, where is this result made of a human aerosol in a lab, or is it made by a dental aerosol? And finally, there are very, very few studies about dental aerosols. And that's something I want to show you. Some of these studies are a little bit older. Some of them are published during the last months. And maybe we can answer the question, are we playing Russian roulette? What about the infectivity of dental aerosols? Is there a proof that gives us the answer about the infectivity? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's go back some decades. So the first study on dental aerosols is published by Mikkic et al. In 1969. So 1969, and what they did is, you see that on the right side, this was their setup. They built up a test chamber, not with a mannequin, so with in vivo study. So there is a patient under a test box, and then they blow air through this test box, and then they measure, or they take air samplings, and they measure the bacterial load of this air. Well, finally, there is not it is clear that when you breathe, you find the bacteria. So they measure the bacterial load, by the way. So CFU means colony forming units. So if you breathe, okay, you find the bacteria. If you speak, you find bacteria. But also when you cough, quite interesting is if you use a turbine, so 2 times higher than coughing, and the 3-in-1 piston, 43,000 CFUs per minute. So a first study published in 1969, dental aerobiology, and this is the quote. If you're interested, you can Google that and you will find this first study. Well, and I want to make a jump to 50 years later, 2021, published by Holiday in January this year. And they did a so-called contamination study. So they add a fluorescent dye to the dental water, and then they check the contamination. This is a typical study, contamination study. So they do not distinguish between droplets, splatter, and aerosol. So each area you contaminate, you can measure. And the interesting thing is they did this in a so-called open plan clinic environment. Let me explain this. What you see on the right side is a floor in a dental university where they train students. So this is a floor with 9 cabinets. And if they treat in cabinet number, I would say it's number 3, it's in the center, it's the red dot, then they find a contamination of the complete floor because the walls are not closed. So the cabinets are, well, there are just walls, I think 1 meter was inside the study. So wooden walls, 1 meter. So there is a free flow available, and the result is each blue area is contaminated by bacteria, by viruses, by this blue dye out of the patient's mouth of this center. So, and well, this is the problem. And another interesting result of their study is that after 10 minutes, most of the aerosols are settled down to the floor or to the surface. Because, well, there is a question rising up. If you treat a patient that suffer on SARS-CoV-2 and it's in the air, the aerosols are stay in the air, how long do you have to wait until you can start with surface disinfection, for instance, or until the next patient can enter the room? And the answer of this study is wait 10 minutes before you start your surface disinfection. And that's a recommendation in Germany, by the way. 15 minutes cooling time, and then you start your surface disinfection. 30 minutes cooling time until the next patient can enter the room or open the window to dilute the aerosols. That would be alternative. So that's a practical consequence of this study. So I want to show you, ladies and gentlemen, a second study, which I think is a very nice study. Bennett et al. Published 2000, because they did this study in dental clinics in London. So it's not a lab, it's real life. And they want to prove the threat being infected by tuberculosis. So 2000, discussion about tuberculosis. Today, discussion about SARS-CoV-2, and maybe interesting study to, well, to compare results. And what they did, let me go back to this slide, they place Petri dishes in 2-meter distance to a patient's head, and they measure the bacterial load, because tuberculosis is a bacteria. They measure the bacterial load. And what you see on the next slide is a result, the result of one morning in a dental clinic in London. So you see on the x-axis the time scale, and you see on the y-axis the bacterial load they measure on these Petri dishes. So they treat 12 patients in this morning, and they start at 8 o'clock. And what you see is air is not sterile, so they can count approximately 800 colony forming units, and then nothing happened, first patient, second patient. But suddenly when they treat the third patient, you've got AGP, aerosol generating procedure, and the bacterial load rise up to the factor of 8. And it needs 30 minutes to come back to the base level. And for this reason, the recommendation is 30 minutes. Yeah? So once again, 10 minutes in the first study, 30 minutes in this study. It needs some time to settle down. Therefore, there's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Well, finally, they gave a recommendation. And it was a theoretical study, because they do not prove, they do not treat a tuberculosis patient, but they compare. Because the theoretical infection with tuberculosis, you find a concentration of 70,000 tuberculosis bacteria per milliliter saliva. So, and then they prove that you can inhalate during a 15 minutes treatment 0.014 microliter to 0.12 microliter of saliva because of the inhalation of these dental aerosols, where I have to say without protecting equipment, so without wearing masks. So this is the inhalation during a 15 minutes treatment. So, and their result was that it is possible, it's an easy mathematical calculation, that it is possible to be infected with 1 to 8 tuberculosis bacteria. So, and if you do the same calculation with SARS-CoV-2, where you find in the studies, in the literature, some figures like 7 million copies per milliliter saliva, you can do the same qualification there, and this would result in 100 to 1,000 coronaviruses per treatment if you follow the same theoretical principle by Bennett. So the question is this enough? And this is the questions I cannot answer. I just want to give you the summary of the CDC, so the American Disease Central of Disease, and they quote, "There are currently no data available to assess the risk of SARS-CoV-2 transmission during dental practice. It is not possible up to now. There are no international studies available that prove or that, well, say negative, it is not possible being infected." So this is my summary. And the summary is either not positive or not negative, but I can't answer that. I can't answer the question. So therefore, all we have to do is mitigate the threat, discuss strategy to reduce the risk. And that's my third segment, because I want to discuss now strategies to reduce the risk. And well, there are three zones. There is the oral cavity, zone 1, the distance to the dentist and the dental assistant, zone 2, well, and the dental room, which is zone 3, and there is a zone 4, by the way, also available. This is your dental clinic, but I just forget that. So if we just compare all the strategies, you will see that you combine already these different strategies to mitigate the risk. First of all, you can prioritize. Well, in Germany, you do anamnesis. You ask your patient, do you suffer on fever? Maybe you measure the fever. Are there any symptoms? And that's a first prioritization. The second thing is, well, if the incidences are high, you can decide, okay, I do not have to do prophylactic treatments right now. And I do not have to do a prophylactic treatment by a powder jet handpiece. So that's your decision. So you can either avoid or reduce this AGPs, and it's up to you to reduce the risk. Then number 3, I think this is one of the most successful mitigation strategy, that is mouth rinsing. Well, I'm not a drug advisor, and there are a lot of studies that proves that this and this and this is helpful. If it's H2O2 or PVP iodine or green tea or whatever. So I'm not a drug advisor, but there are tons of study that shows that this is the right solution. But I think that's quite successful. Well, I want to focus today on intraoral evacuation, because I think this is the gold standard, and this is the non-contamination principle. So reduce the spray mist and reduce the dental aerosol at source. So a non-contamination principle. Well, and finally, you do a lot of reprocessing. So you disinfect the cannulas, you disinfect the drill, you disinfect and steam sterilize, etc. And that's finally a very successful mitigation strategy. So let's come to zone 2. I think the most important mitigation strategy is your PPE, your personal protective equipment. Well, I know the discussion, what is the right mask? Is it FFP2 or N95 mask? Do I have to wear a surgical mask, 2 masks over the other, or a face shield? Well, each country gets his own regulations. In Germany, a face shield plus a surgical mask is recommended. If you treat a risk patient or a patient you are not safe, then a FFP2 mask additionally. So instead of a surgical mask, so FFP2 mask. But this changed from country to country. So by the way, goggles, gloves, a cap, which is new in Germany because nobody wears cap before the pandemic. So I will say the PPE will change also after the corona. Things will be normal, quite normal, and the PPE is something that will change in future. Well, finally, you disinfect all surfaces. That's not a new story with surface disinfection. And there is also a possibility to add extraoral evacuation system, extraoral suction systems, but I think they are not necessary, but that's something I have to prove by the next slide. So, and finally, in zone 3, there are a lot of air filtering systems on the market or air purifiers. Some manufacturers offers UVC light. Well, and we can discuss, does this make sense? Yes and no. And there are also disinfection possibilities available. Nothing of this is 100%. It's always the combination of mitigation strategies that keeps your office safe. So it's always a combination of different mitigation strategies. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go into some details. What are studies? How can you reduce the risk of these dental aerosols? And published by Searches this year. No, it was December last year on the Journal of Dental Research. They published a possibility to reduce this spray mist and to reduce these dental aerosols by changing the speed of your drills, of your turbine and of your contra and straight angled hand pieces. So they published a study where they prove when you reduce the speed down to 60,000 rounds per minute, you can dramatically reduce the amount of dental aerosols. Is this a solution? I don't think so. I don't think so that it is a solution to go back to slow rotation, go back to hand instruments. Maybe some of you say, okay, I don't want to use my scalers anymore. Let's go to hand instrumentation. I don't think that this is a solution. There are other manufacturers, they give tips to reduce the amount of cooling water. That's something I would say, okay, this is not a good solution. I think it's not a good solution to go back to former times. And maybe it gives other possibilities. And one possibility is to use high volume suction system. And this is a first study I want to introduce, published by a German colleague, Professor Reitmeier, 2010. And once again, they did this contamination studies, and they proved that if you use a high volume suction system, and if you go to literature, this is always called HVE, then you can reduce the contamination area up to 65%. 65%, is this enough? Especially when you look to other studies, and I already introduced this study on this open plan clinic, where I prove that you contaminate everything, because then they compare different suction systems. This is the story and the result without suction. And the next slide is the result if you use a saliva extractor. And that's it. Oh God, it's much better. So a saliva ejector, 40 liter per minute suction flow rate, quite good. And then they add HVE, so a high volume evacuation, and this is the result. I would say this is disappointing. If you compare B and C, maybe it's even worse than just using a saliva extractor. So I think that was quite disappointing. So I want to give you another study, and they measure aerosols, so dental aerosols. A study from November last year, and they measure only dental aerosols by this aerosol sampling device you see on the right side. So this is just measure the aerosols. And then they compare a suction with a saliva extractor, an HVE plus a so-called extraoral suction. It looks like a funnel you place in front of the mouth. And it's like a funnel with very high flow rate, and you see the results on the table. Just using a saliva ejector, they can measure 120,000 particles, aerosol particles, on the operator side, and the same average on the assistant side. If they use a HVE, that goes down to 40,000 or 30,000. If you add an extraoral vacuum system, it stays on 40,000. So there is no additional effect. It even gets into the wrong direction. So there is no additional effect of using an extraoral device. So here you see, okay, it helps something. Once again, 60–65% efficiency. So let's look to some videos. And here you see on the left side the spray mist on a saliva extractor. On the right side, HVE, and it's quite nice. And if we compare another HVE on the left side with a steel cannula, it's the same HVE, and on the right side, well, I would say a better HVE, then you see it's a difference. And I want to answer now the question why the left one is not an HVE and the right side is a good HVE, and what is the practical consequence? And this was already published in the 70s by Davis. And the result of his study was that the flow rate is the key factor. So if you use an intraoral suction system, the key parameter is the flow rate. And the flow rate, and that's his statement from Davis et al., should be 300 liters per minute. Well, and there is a vacuum necessary, a negative pressure, but this vacuum should be not too high. Otherwise, you could hurt your patient. You touch the gingiva, well, and then this hurts, and therefore the pressure is not so important. The flow rate is important. Well, nobody believes these old studies. They are made in the 70s. Many people forget that. And therefore, we did our own study right out of this clinic. And what you see is live on the webcam on the back. Here you see my mannequin. And what we did there is we proved the efficiency of intraoral suction. We test different cannula designs and we test different suction positions. I call it the first suction position is on the upper left corner, which is suboptimal. So the worst case scenario, 5 centimeter distance to the burr. Now, so this is not a good suction technique. The picture on the lower left, this is the perfect suction technique, 1 centimeter to the drill, to the burr. This is perfect suction technique. So we measure both worst case scenario and best case scenario. And how we did the measurement, this is a new technique based on an industrial standard to measure sprays. So this is a standard technique to measure sprays in industry. It's a so-called shadow imaging. It's based on computer, on a very powerful software. And the background is that you've got video images. You see a video screen on the right side. And then there is an algorithm, a software that detects each particle, that measures each particle, that measures the sizes and measures the speed of that particle. So each particle that emits the mouth can be measured. So that's the story behind that. And the result is that if you compare different cannulas, you've got different aerosol reduction efficiency. And just compare the first three. That's something you can also see in the webcam. This is a huge cannula. This is a little bit smaller cannula for children. This is a special aerosol cannula, number 3. And part number 4 is a saliva extractor. And the result is 100%, 99%, 100% aerosol reduction. That means we remove each particle that emits the mouth. Each particle under this worst case scenario. And this is a wonderful story. Not 65%, 100% efficiency. If you use suction with a high flow rate, and that's the first column, 330, 270, 330 liter per minute. And a saliva ejector can evaporate only 38%, only efficiency of 38%. Maybe this is lower as you thought. Well, and then we compare different techniques that are mainly on the market in the United States and in Asia, because they use smaller tubes, millimeter HVE, small hoses or suction systems that are cheap and optimized to vacuum. And what you see is negative, 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 negative. The flow rate is too low. And this is the overall summary of this study. This is a flow rate, a S curve, the flow rate compared to the reduction rate. And the story of this is that there is a green area where even under a worst case scenario, you can catch each dental aerosol. And this is 300 liter per minute. If you've got a suction with 300 liter per minute, you're on the safe side. If the suction is too low, then you're on the red side, and then you have a possibility to optimize the suction position. And that's what on the second result, on the second slide, if you optimize the suction position, then you can optimize the results. If your suction line can handle, if your suction can handle minimum 200 liter per minute. So 200 liter per minute, this is the so-called tipping factor. If your suction is lower than 200 liter per minute, then, well, you can optimize everything, particles will emit, and this is just easy physics. Yeah? You need a force to slow down the particles, and this force is a counterflow, a negative counterflow based on this flow rate. This is easy physics. Well, and this is not a new story. This is published 2004 by a very important American scientist, Steve Harrell, and this is also focused and published on the ISO standard 10637, where per definition there a high volume suction system, a HVE, needs 250 liter per minute. So this is important. Why is this a story? Because in many countries and many dentists focus on vacuum. So they measure their suction by pressing the thumb onto the cannula. And if this hurts, then they say, oh, this is strong. Now, what a strong suction system. Well, this car definitely is a strong car with a horsepower, but if this car stays in a traffic jam, then you do not transport something. I live in Stuttgart and this is my daily situation, and it makes no sense to drive a Porsche or Mercedes because you stay there. What you need is free flow. And this is an important story for my practical tips, which are now at the end of my presentation for the next 15 minutes. So what are the practical consequences? So if you can avoid dental aerosols, if you need flow rate how can you manage it? How can you optimize your suction, or how can you measure it? If your thumb is not the right instrument to measure the flow rate, what are your possibilities? Number 4, keeping the office safe. First of all, you always will contaminate something because of the big droplets. So this is zone 1. You cannot avoid these big droplets that contaminate the vicinity. So therefore, you touch something. So therefore, you cannot avoid surface disinfection. I gave you the tip, wait 10 minutes until you start the surface disinfection, because these aerosols needs time to settle down. So 10 minutes. I recommend ethanol-based disinfectant because it's normally fast. And I recommend a virucidal one. I know that the coronavirus is an enveloped virus and you need only a limited virucidal disinfectant, but I also recommend there are other threats like tuberculosis or rotavirus or the norovirus, which are very hard to deactivate. So therefore, a fully virucidal product, that's something I recommend. Well, this is a marketing slide. We offer a wide range of disinfectants, and all of them are effective against SARS-CoV-2, by the way. So how can you measure your flow rate? Well, not with your thumb. This is something you need an expert tool, and this expert tool is, for instance, just you see that in the webcam, this is a flow meter. And that's something we offer to technicians. So ask your technicians or sales reps to measure the flow rate in your clinic. So this can be done during the working time, and this is important to do this by the working time, because you check the flow rate during live procedures, because when you test only one cabinet, when all the power, all the suction goes to this one cabinet, that's easy peasy. You have to test parallel when cabinet number 2, 3, 4, 5 is in operation. These are the critical parameters, because then normally the flow rate drops down. So you have to test this in the right way, and that's something we offer. Just ask your technician or your dental dealer to test your suction. 300 liter, this is a must to reduce these dental aerosols. So what happened if the flow rate is too low? Well, the first problem, and that's really a practical tip, is the suction line. If the suction line is blocked by prophylactic powder, if you do a lot of surgical treatments, you have to rinse with water. Sometimes it looks like a blood sausage inside your tubes. Well, this is something you can easily avoid by cleaning and disinfecting. Daily cleaning and disinfecting. So we offer Ortol. It's the market leader, and DURR Dental launched that in the 60s. Ortol is the best product, and you need 2 products. You need Ortol for disinfection and a weekly cleaning by MD555 555, which is an acid. So you need both daily Ortol, MD555 acid weekly, minimum weekly. So both is important. Well, and finally, you can check, or your technician can check, are there any bottlenecks that ruins the flow rate inside my dental unit? For instance, these filters. If these filters are blocked by alginate, well, this kills the flow rate. So that's something your technician can check. Okay, first step would be cleaning and disinfecting. Second step could be, well, checking the devices. Are there any valves that are blocked? Any filters that are blocked? That would be a solution. Well, and finally, if nothing helps, it could be also the installation, the problem. Because if you use a lot of 90-degree elbow pipings, for instance, or if there are some situations like you see here on the graph, well, this will reduce the flow rate. And whenever you plan a new clinic, go contact experts. because it's not easy peasy to do a good suction planning. And therefore you've got the partners, your dental dealers, they've got planning departments, and we spend a lot of time in training technicians and planning architects to design the correct suction. It's not easy to do that because we need constant flow and constant high flow on each dental unit, and that's the trick. So, and finally, optimize your suction technique, and that's something you can do. In Germany, we recommend always during this pandemic crisis four-handed dentistry. Work in pairs, where the dental assistant can focus and concentrate on the intraoral evaporation of these aerosols. Well, if you work alone, then use some tools like this cheek retractors. I think this is from Ivoclar, but I'm not sure. They are on the market, and use it. And use the right cannulas and the right tools. For instance, this is an ergonomic designed cannula, 16 millimeter cannula that guarantees that high flow rate. This is a correct elbow, which gives you advantages in the ergonomics and ensure this high flow rates. So there are tools available like this new cannulas, especially this aerosol cannula with this rotating shield. Maybe you can check that in the webcam. This was the only cannula that was able during our study to remove the powder of this powder jet handpieces. So this was the only tool that reduced very efficiently this powder. So all the others, they fail. So these tools are available. By the way, another tip for this cannulas. Maybe you don't know the effect, which is called backwash or reflux. What are the parts? Maybe you can once again check the webcam. So if you use your cannula and your handpiece in the upper jaw, normally you have a position like this. So, and now you touch the gingiva, which will be on the PowerPoint slide right now. And then it could happen that liquid flows back to the patient mouth, and that's something Mielke et al. Described 2005, and that's what is described as reflux. And the problem is that you reprocess the cannula after each patient, but you do not reprocess the hose and the adapter. And this liquid is not the liquid of the patient, it's the liquid of all the patients in the morning. And well, I don't have to talk longer about that issue. It's a threat, yes. And well, we developed, or other manufacturers developed, new cannulas with a secondary air inlet. When you block the front, you open the secondary air inlets. So we call that cannulas the Universal Cannula Protect. So these are on the market from DURR Dental and from other manufacturers. So it's a low price part, but it's very important to keep safe. So a very important part. Another very important part to come to the end of today's presentation is also these adapters, these handpieces, because this is a picture I copied from the study from Beck, from Coleman in 2010. And they checked these adapters, these handpieces in different clinics. They made these pictures like this. They are heavily contaminated and they are not correctly reprocessed. So therefore, please keep an eye also on these tools. Reprocess them, disassemble them. The DURR Dental handpieces can be reprocessed. You can place them into a thermal dishwasher. You can steam sterilize them. Check the manual. These are medical products. We as a manufacturer have to give you tips and tricks how to reprocess this. This is the new medical device regulation in Europe. So you have to ask the manufacturer to find the correct way how to clean and disinfect that. Well, and finally, if you upgrade your system, if you upgrade your clinic, maybe your suction pumps are too weak, Well, and then you have to invest in new suction pumps or upgrade the suction pumps. And we developed since decades suction pumps that are focused and designed on flow rate. So this is a suction pump, a dental suction pump that is optimized to flow rate. And that's not a new story since COVID-19. So this is a standard technique since the 80s. Well, and we offer a wide portfolio from one dental clinic to 4 up to huge universities, and we always measure the flow rate, and you will receive a protocol about the correct flow rates of your clinics and your suction lines. Well, and if nothing helps, there is also mobile versions available on the market to do an intraoral suction. I don't think that an extraoral suction is necessary if you do it in the right way. Ladies and gentlemen, before we come to the discussion, let's summarize. What is the summary of today's webinar? Is it a threat working in dentistry? Well, I think it's not a new story. And when we talk about SARS-CoV-2, I think the infectivity is lower as we thought, because you cannot compare it to a human aerosol because of the high dilution to dental water. So there are no studies that prove that there is a higher risk. So all these things published at the New York Times are theoretical discussions and not measured by epidemic numbers, etc. Why is this such a success story? Because since decades, we use very successful mitigation strategies like masks. We wear masks since decades, and this helps. And we combine mitigation strategies like masks, like disinfectings, like intraoral suction, and this is the success story. Routine PPE is an important issue, but also intraoral evacuation at source. And this is my non-contamination philosophy. Reduce the problem before it starts. So intraoral evacuation. And therefore the take-home message is, it's not the vacuum, it's the flow rate. It's the counterflow that slow down the particles, because before they emit, before they hit your face shields, before you inhalate them. And therefore you need a strong suction system based on flow rate. This is something you can measure. This is something you can ask your technician to optimize. You can optimize that by keeping the flow high. So disinfect your suction line, clean the filters, and you can also optimize by optimize your suction technique. 1 centimeter to the drill, this is the optimum. Otherwise, you will reduce or you will evaporate the cooling water, and this is a negative effect. So 1 centimeter is the optimum. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I want to open now the discussion. I will stop my presentation and I've got some final questions to you. Thank you. There is a Facebook group, Dental Aerosol, and I ask you to join this Facebook group. So when you go to Facebook and enter Dental Aerosol, there is a Facebook group where I publish new studies about, well, dental aerosol, new results, and maybe also webinars that are available. So take this chance to register there, and I will stop